Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amanda Matthews, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator here at AdvisoCon. And I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, How to Add Shapes and Connectors in Microsoft Visio. Here at AdvisoCon, we are a group of authors, teachers, consultants, and technologists who are passionate about helping organizations learn, scale, and grow with a mix of methodology and technology to deliver results. Recently, AdvisoCon has stepped into a new area using project management for community involvement by integrating a nonprofit and community outreach department. We offer free bi-weekly webinars that we refer to as Webinar Wednesdays, in which we spend 30 minutes to an hour teaching topics ranging from Microsoft Project, Project Server, Project Online, Power BI, Visio, SharePoint, Project Program, and portfolio management and methodology approaches. With attending any of our training sessions, we offer PDUs as we are a registered education provider with the Project Management Institute. At the close of today's session, I will give some instructions on how to claim your PDUs and how to contact AdvisoCon for any questions you may have. So now, before we get started, I'd like to go over a few things so you know how to participate in today's event. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to the AdvisoCon YouTube channel for those who could not attend today's session live. Please note that any questions or comments submitted will not be displayed in the recording, nor will any of your personal information be shared. Please review the control menu that should be on the top right of your screen. This control panel gives you the option to adjust the volume and most of your other settings. The audience will be muted during today's session, so in order to ask questions, you will submit these questions in the questions window of the control panel. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Kevin Broder, our Director of Products here at AdvisoCon. So without further ado, I will hand this presentation over so we can get this webinar started.
Great, thanks, Amanda. So as was mentioned today, we're going to be talking about Visio. We're going to do kind of a basics of Visio, what is Visio, what do you use it for, what are shapes, how do we use connectors, different kinds of things we can do with Visio. One of the great things about this presentation is, a lot of our Webinar Wednesdays are very geared towards the project manager, using Project Server, Project Desktop, and if you're an attendee of our webinars and not a project manager or not using project, you may be saying, this isn't for me. Visio is one of those tools that really, although it's really useful for a project manager, it expands into many other areas. Whether you're a resource manager, a staff analyst, a software designer, a construction manager, an architect. Visio is one of those tools that can really span across many different roles and has many different use cases. So we'll kind of go over that. We'll talk about Visio. We'll talk about kind of the main component of Visio, which is putting shapes on a diagram. Talk about how to connect those shapes, and then how do we make our little rough diagram look more professional by using themes and other little tips and tricks to clean up our diagram and make them look nice. We'll have some time for a demo and plenty of time for Q&A. So we will get started. So first of all, what is Visio? Well, Visio is a diagramming tool. It's Microsoft's tool to build flowcharts and all sorts of different diagrams. You can use Visio, as I kind of mentioned, in a lot of different ways. Visio does vector-based graphics, which means that, depending on what you're using, most of it is vector-based. So what that means is you can expand it and make it bigger or make it smaller, and you won't get pixelation. Now, of course, you can put pictures into Visio, which that would not be true of the pictures you paste in. But for most of the out-of-the-box shapes and things like that, you can make them bigger, make them smaller, and they'll retain the same quality, and you won't get all the little pixelation dots or things like that. So that's what we mean by it's a vector graphics type tool. As I mentioned, Visio has many different use cases. So as a project manager, one of the things that we often find ourselves doing is doing process analyst work. So Visio is really great for that type of work, doing flowcharts, describing how a process is supposed to work, how a system is supposed to be designed, the different components of a business process or the ideal situation of a business process. Also doing organization charts. So maybe you're got a project team, you want to kind of show the different team, the different components of the team, the hierarchy of the team, who reports to who, what organization each person on the team comes from. Visio is a great tool for that. Just a nice canvas. You can drag on different shapes, maybe put pictures of the folks, put their names, their titles, and kind of organize it in whatever format you want without having to deal with all the anchoring points and different things that you would have to deal with if you were trying to use Word or some other type of software. So once again, great use for a project manager, also great use for, say, a resource manager or a staff analyst or someone like that that needs to make org charts. Expanding beyond your basic shapes in Visio, you have a lot of picture type shapes, which we'll talk about, that allow you to create maps. So you can create physical maps, maps of like office spaces, layout of a new office, a new building, HVAC systems. Some, don't get me wrong, you'll probably use some more advanced software as you actually get into civil engineering or anything like that. But in terms of creating a basic physical map, Visio has some built-in functionality for that. And then of course network mapping. So if you're in the IT field, you're doing some type of software design or system engineering, system design, there's lots of different shapes in Visio, like servers and computers and users and different things like that that you can use to create a system diagram, an interface diagram between the different components of your software system or your network infrastructure, or just building a network architecture of the different switches and routers and different things in different buildings and all sorts of different kind of mapping shapes you can use to create maps. So totally different use case than doing a flow chart or an organization chart, but you can also create maps. The last one I listed on here that I personally use Visio for is value stream mapping. So if you're doing a lot of lean manufacturing techniques or Six Sigma, any of those type of techniques, one of a related topic in there is value stream mapping, which requires you to build a chart of the value stream, and then you have different shapes and different components on that chart to help identify how long it takes and queue time and all sorts of different things you can do to try and identify areas for improvement within a process. That's kind of the main point of value stream mapping, is to try and find different areas within a process where the flow time can be improved to try and make a process go faster or more efficient. Visio is a great tool for value stream mapping. A lot of times you do that on a whiteboard or with post-it notes literally on a board in a room. But in today's environment, many teams are virtual, they're located in different parts of the country or different parts of the globe, and so getting everyone in the same room using Post-it notes is not always possible. Visio makes a really great tool for doing that virtually. So very similar to kind of how you would do it for flowcharts, but a little bit more specific of a kind of type of flowchart. So the first component we need to talk about when building any Visio diagram is a shape. So shapes, we're going to call it just a general term for kind of the main component of a Visio diagram, which is just whatever it is that you're putting on a page. So a shape might be something very simple, like a rectangle or a circle or a diamond. And it also then can be kind of those image type shapes that I was talking about earlier, where you could have like a desk and a chair and a server, or I think on the screen there I've got like a kitchen sink and a bathtub. So you can put all sorts of different shapes on your Visio diagrams, depending on what you're trying to build. Obviously, you probably wouldn't use those two types of things together. You wouldn't want your office that close to your bathroom, but you get the idea. Depending on what you're trying to map out, you can use different kinds of shapes. Within shapes, you've got lots of different formatting options, which we'll go into. You can make them different colors. You can make them, different outlines, all sorts of different formatting options we'll go to. But generally speaking, shapes are where we're going to put your information. So usually they will have text on them describing, if that's a process, what's happening in that process, who's doing that process, or if it's a decision or a gate, describing what that gate is. And the text can go either on the shape, depending on what shape it is, or below or above the shape. If it's a shape that wouldn't really have text on top of it. You have all sorts of different kinds of shapes you can use. And these are going to be the main component of any of your Visio diagram, is having those shapes on the page. Once you have those shapes on the page, oftentimes, especially if we're doing some type of flow chart, you're going to need to connect them. So connectors are just as important in shapes as shapes in Visio. they can tell a lot of the story. You know, you may think it's just an arrow going between two boxes, but depending on how you use them, they can definitely they're a big factor in whatever diagram it is you're trying to produce. So you've got different types of connectors, which I've kind of tried to outline in that little screenshot there. You know, you can have straight connectors, ones that bend at right angles, ones that curve. Those are kind of your three different types of connectors. You can control the different arrows. So this is actually extremely important for a process flow, right? Because the connector we have, say, between process 1 and 2 here, where it's a dashed line going one way, tells a much different story than the connector between process 2 and decision 1, where it's a dual connector saying, you know, it's a two-way type data flow. So maybe that says, you know, process 2 goes into decision 1 and can come back depending on certain scenarios, right? Whereas the connector here is identified as it only flows this direction. So it's very important in a process diagram or a flow chart to actually really focus in on your connectors and determine, you know, what different types of arrows you need. A different type of dash can tell a different story. You know, you probably would want to throw a legend on your diagram so that the user knows the difference between a dash line and a straight and a solid line and so forth and so on. And then of course you can also change the color and many other formatting options of your connectors. And so you can use connectors in your flowcharts to help tell different stories and different parts of your process. And so very important to think about when you're building your diagrams. And the last thing I'll show you within the demo is the connection points, right? In this diagram here, you can see that most of our connectors are connecting kind of in the middle side of the shapes. This one's coming out of the bottom of a shape. You have many different connection points. We'll show you how to create new connection points so that if you've got kind of a weird shape and you want the arrow to come out somewhere else, we'll show you how to put a connection point where you want it. Last thing is once you've got your diagram kind of outlined the way you want, you can apply a theme. And I've got a couple examples of some really ugly themes on the right there. But the important thing is here, Visio gives you a lot of out-of-the-box themes that you can use that help you get a good start with some colors that go together and can look pretty professional. They also have some kind of crazy ones that probably don't look super professional, but maybe if you're building some kind of marketing material or something that you need a little more pizzazz to, like that bottom one with all the different kind of colors blending in and so forth. You can use all sorts of different themes, and Visio has a bunch out of the box for you, so that you can get a good start, and then you can tweak from there based on you know, what style you want, what message you're trying to convey, and what your diagram is for. As I kind of alluded to, at least in my opinion, if you're doing something for professional, for work, for, you know, presenting to management or your stakeholders or whatever the case, I would recommend simpler is better. So a couple different colors, but maybe no more than two, maybe three, if you really need them to signify different things, and try to use colors that go together. Doing something like that bottom diagram for a professional business meeting will get people too focused on the design and not focused on the actual message that you're trying to convey. So sometimes that's a good thing, but most of the time we don't want that. We're trying to deliver a message to our stakeholders or to our users of the flowchart. And so with that, I'm going to get out of slides here and we will jump into a little bit of a demo here. So for this demo, I've just got a blank Visio document open here. If you just start up Visio and you get to the new screen, you hit blank, this is what you'll get. You get just a kind of a blank sheet of paper with nothing on it, blank canvas for you to do whatever it is you need to do. And so the first thing we talked about was shapes. And so obviously to get your diagram started, you're gonna need some shapes. On the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see the shapes file out here, and we're gonna use this to grab whatever shapes that we need. Out of the box, I believe you may start with some shapes here. I believe you start blank just like this, and you have the little more shapes fly out, where you'll have a big menu of different shapes you can select from. One of probably the easiest ones to start with is going into the general section here. because you got a bunch of kind of categories of different shapes, business shapes, flowchart shapes, and then you get into kind of your physical objects, your floor plans, your network shapes. But if you go into general and you grab basic shapes, that's a good starting point. That'll get you kind of your your rectangles, your squares, your circles, and so forth. To bring a shape onto your page, you just click and drag the shape you want. And you can see we have no theme here selected or anything like that. So we've just got a very basic black and white shapes and so forth and so on. So you can just click and drag your shapes onto your page, and you can open up more than one of these panes, so you can easily flip back and forth between them. So if you were creating, I think in my slides there we had like a cross-functional flow chart, and so you can open up your cross-functional flow chart shapes. If you need to bring in a swim lane, and the first one you bring on the page, it'll give you the whole nice layout with the title and everything here. And that way if you need a vertical, you can switch it to vertical by using the vertical swim lane. That did not do what I wanted to. But I guess since we're doing a horizontal one, you'd bring in a vertical separator like that, so you can have more than one phase, and you can expand and collapse these and so forth and so on. But it's very, very intuitive and easy to use. Just drag and drop, click and drag, just like any other editor you've used in the past. Very intuitive. The shapes you do find what you're looking for. If you aren't doing a flow chart like this, you can go into your floor plans. We've got building plans. You can just start to see how many different types of shapes they have in here. Let's see what's in this irrigation one. Now I am not a architect or any type of that, so I don't really know what these are. But I guess if you're designing an irrigation system, that's what a valve looks like, and a backflow preventer, and so you've got all sorts of really cool shapes in here, depending on the industry you're in, and depending on what you're trying to build. There's lots of different interesting things in here. I can put a cat on the page. Lots of cool stuff. Whatever you're trying to build, you should be able to find something in here that you need. And if you don't, or if you're looking for something very, very specific, you can paste in images, just like you would find, for anything else. So if you want a company logo, or if you're talking about like a system design and you need to show integration between, say, Office 365, and you want to bring in the Office 365 logo, you can paste that right on the page, and you can use that image as a shape. So once you've got your shapes on the page and how you want, which is probably nothing like this diagram, we need to connect them. And so right now we've been using the pointer tool. So that's what allows me to click and drag and kind of resize my shapes and so forth and so on. And by the way, if you want to add text to your shapes, you can just double click and put some text in there. And that's how you can add text to your shapes. And for one like this, it's an image, your text is going to appear below it by default. And you can change where the text appears in different formattings of the text using, your standard kind of WYSIWYG editor that you have in Word, very similar. And by right-clicking and formatting, you can move the text around and so forth and so on. But going from our shapes discussion to our connections, you'll see up in your ribbon your tools section. And here is where you're going to switch from the pointer tool, which we're currently using, to the connector tool. And so once you click that button once, you can then see we've got these little snap points. So if you see the little points that appear on the shape as you hover over them, those are the connection points that you have currently on your shapes. So you can drag from one to the other, and that's going to create your connector. So we want to connect from this valve that we entered to our cat. You'll see that our cat has no connection points. So just going to kind of quickly create one as we drag there. To modify the different properties of our connector, we're going to right-click on it and go down to Format Shape. It's going to pop out the flyout on our right-hand side, where you're going to have all your different options of formatting a shape. And if you've ever done this in Word or Excel or anything like that, it's very similar. You've got your different tabs of your shape where you can, modify the different properties of it. So if you want to change the color of the line, you can come in here and change it to a red line. And down here is where we're going to get our arrows. So we're going to have a beginning arrow, And you'll see, if you ever forget which one the beginning or the ending, conveniently the arrows will show you. So this one's pointing to the left, so that's the beginning arrow, and then an ending arrow. And you can pick different types for your arrows. And if I click off of this, you can see over here in our middle of our screen here that it's added the arrows that I just told it to. You can change the size of the arrows, the jumbo or very small, depending on what you need and what looks good for your diagram. Depending on how big you've made your shapes and so forth and so on, you'll have to kind of tweak with that until you get it how you want it. You can also modify multiple connectors at the same time. So if you hold the control key while you're selecting them and then right click and format shape, if you don't have this open already, you can change the properties of multiple connectors at the same time. So if I want to put an arrow on both of them, make them large arrows, you can see now that I've got a large arrow here at the beginning and a large arrow there. And obviously it was only the changes that I just made while having both of them selected that would appear there. And so by using this little format pane here, that's how you're going to change basically all the properties of your connectors. It's also a good way to change some of the more advanced properties of your shapes should you need to. By selecting one of your shapes, you can use, once again, this format pane on the right-hand side to change the different fill colors of your shapes and things of that nature if you want to do it that way. It works totally fine. I mentioned that the connection points. So as we were hovering over a connector here, we saw we had just connectors in the middle of each side of this square. But if you needed an arrow to say come out from the bottom right-hand section of this box, you couldn't do it because there isn't a connector there. So back in our tools menu, there's this little X here. And that's going to be our connection point tool. I don't know what it's actually called. Oh, well, how about that? It is called the connection point tool. So I got that right. Once you have that open, you'll see all the different connection points in all your shapes. And should you need to add a connection point, you can hold the control key and then click where you'd like that connection point, and that will add a connection point for you there. Once you've got the connection point added, you can switch back to your connector tool and you'll see now you have that connection point. And so then we can connect straight from there to, say, the bottom of our circle. So that way you can really move your connection points wherever you want. This is one of the things that when people first get started in Visio, especially if they're using weird shapes like a cat or something like that, or even if you got just a complicated flow chart and you need a bunch of different arrows coming out, you don't want them all coming from the same spot. This is a really good tip, how to add multiple connection points. That way you can really tweak with that and make your arrows look exactly how you want them to look. So that's a really useful feature. Once you've got your flowchart kind of all organized, or your org chart all organized, or whatever the case may be, and you may want to do this at the beginning or at the end, it's really up to you. You can use themes and other features to help color code and make your design look more professional. So if you come over to the Design tab in the ribbon, you're going to have a whole selection of themes that appear. And these appear just like they would in Word or Excel. You're probably somewhat familiar with these, but I think in Visio they're really useful. So you have a whole selection of what we call professional themes, modern themes. I guess these are called trendy and hand-drawn, which can be useful like if you're trying to represent this as a sketch of something. So I would recommend sticking with something in the professional category if you're trying to do a business type diagram. And then within each theme you have different variants. And so up here you can pick different kind of color variants to whatever suits your style, whatever you think fits with the diagram you're trying to draw. That will automatically apply that theme to all your shapes if you haven't formatted already, like we did with this one. And it'll make its best guess, right? But you may have more than one box, like another, let's go back into our basic shapes here, another, rectangle over here, and you want to represent that these two processes are something totally different, so you want them to be different colors. I wouldn't recommend just coming in here and using the format shape thing. You can, but if you come back over to the Home tab, you'll notice that you have a Shape Styles box up here in your ribbon. And using that, it will automatically apply your theme and you give you a bunch of selections you can use for that shape. So if I wanted it to have this kind of red, dark red color, I can pick that, and I know it goes with the colors of my theme. So I know that it's going to look okay together, and it'll look okay with the different shapes and different other colors that I have within my theme. And it also makes a much easier way to change multiple colors. So if I want to change the cat and the valve, I can just come up here and quickly say, oh, those are the blue ones, right? Or maybe later on I need to change the cat. Oh, you know what? I want it to be the same as this box. And so you have your colors right there. You don't have to go back over here and remember what color. Well, which version of red did I use for that cat? You've got them all right up here. Quick, easy access in your shape styles. So it makes it really nice and easy to find the color that you're looking for. Another quick tip about design and things of that nature in your Visio diagram is a white background is good for a lot of cases. If you're going to paste this into a Word document or part of some other bigger presentation, white background is really good. It makes it blend in nicely, because usually your Word document's going to have a white background. But if this is a standalone document, sometimes it does look nice to put a background on it. And so in your design tab, you have the backgrounds selection pane, which will give you a whole theme of backgrounds. And now, because of the theme I picked, it's got a kind of a gray background, so you can't really see this, but each of these different gray looking boxes is a slightly different gradient. And so like this one has a vertical gradient coming from the top. It looks like this one's got a horizontal gradient, so left to right. This one's got a corner, so I think the top left corner is darker than the bottom right corner. So these are all different gradients you can choose. There's also like a little globe background and some basic styles you can apply. So if you select one of those, it'll give your diagram a background. Once again, with the backgrounds, I would recommend a simpler background for most of the time. So you can do like just a solid gray. You can do maybe a vertical gradient, something just to give it a little bit of depth. So it's got just a little bit of background. It'll make your document look a little bit nicer if it is meant to stand on its own. If you're going to paste it into a PowerPoint or something that's already got a background color, just keep it the same background color. A lot of times is what you really are looking for. But if it's going to stand on its own, or your PowerPoint's got a really dark background color and you need it to be in its own box, you can use the background feature in Visio to give your document just a little bit more pop, and it'll make it look a little bit more professional if it's got a background in there. But I do think that depending on what you're building, some of these ones, like putting the world behind it, might be a little bit over the top, and probably aren't the best to use. But it really depends on what you're building and how strong that background is. And you can play with it a little bit and make it different colors and so forth to try and make it just subtle enough that it works with your document. And so that's all we have for our demo. I will pause now and see if we have any questions.
Yeah, it looks like we have a couple here. The first one is, can you have a standard template for your organization? That way everyone looks the same amount of professional.
Yes, you can create templates in Visio. If you come into the File New screen here, you're going to see there's a whole bunch of templates that Microsoft has for you, and you can create custom templates here and then distribute them throughout your organization. And unfortunately, we don't have enough time to kind of go into that here, but that's definitely something we can help you with if you need assistance with how to distribute those.
Great. So it looks like we're wrapping up, so we will get to the remaining questions via email. We'll reach out to you directly. So thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, How to Add Shapes and Connectors in Microsoft Visio. We welcome your questions, suggestions, and feedback. For more information, you can email us at contact@advisacon.com. Once you exit today's webinar, you will receive a survey on this presentation, and you will need to complete and submit this survey in order to receive your PDUs. From there, you will receive a follow-up email within 2 business days with your PDU information. If you're watching this recording on YouTube or another social media platform, please be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future uploads. So on behalf of Kevin, myself, and AdviseCon, thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you participate in future webinars. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.